Hello and welcome to the Total Clarity Podcast. I'm Mike Varley.
I'm Jessie Hyatt.
And this is our 16th walk, the coast of Brooklyn. We have a guest with us today. And before Jessie introduces her, just want to give a little bit of context. There are so many sounds here along the waterfront, between the boats, the helicopters. There's even an art installation sound. If you're looking on the video in your left corner, I think, there's a bell. You may see people ringing it. If you're just listening, you may just hear people ringing it. But it's a project called Reverberations. It's pretty cool. I recommend you check it out. But there's going to be a lot of different fun auxiliary noises this episode. And as far as our guest, Jessie's going to do a little intro.
Today we have our friend Nina Bowers on. And Nina is a placemaker. She has been specifically making places along the waterfront of New York City, Brooklyn, for the last few years, but over the last 10 years has been making places and setting spaces and working within many different spaces and places in both New York and LA. And we're going to talk to Nina more about these things.
Yeah,
these
happy to
places
be
and
here.
spaces.
Thanks for joining us.
Yeah.
I won't jump in yet. I know you've got more to cover.
We won't jump right into Nina's stories yet because we want to talk about the distance that we've walked so far. We actually wanted to talk about it last week, full disclosure, and forgot. So.
But this is our first time that we're talking about our distance travel with a guest on, so it's nice that we're going to get a little real-time feedback here.
Ooh.
Yeah.
And I don't even know where we've gone the past 5 weeks. Jessie did all the research this time.
I did. So.
This is covering weeks 10 through 15.
Yes, it's weeks 10 through 15.
Or I guess 11 through 15.
I'm going to pull them up.
Because we already did weeks 6 through 10.
Yeah, it would actually be 11 through 15. So, are you ready?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so week 11, we walked, by the end of week 11, it was 1,441 miles. And that would have taken us to a place that I've never heard of before, but I really liked the name. It's in Newfoundland?
I think
Newfoundland.
Yeah.
It's called Happy Valley Goose Bay.
Oh, wow. That
So.
sounds
cute.
like some really great artisanal products would come out of there.
Yeah.
Yeah, probably. I hope it means that the geese are happy in the valley. I think it does.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so that's where we could get to by the end of week 11.
Yeah.
By the end of week 12, we walked 1,572 miles, and that would get us to this was actually a really tricky one because it put us like in the center of the country where there aren't really any cities or places
no
or
Happy Goose
landmarks
Valley.
that I know of, or like with cute names like Happy Valley Goose Bay. I found Garden City, Kansas.
Okay.
Which, do either of you have ever heard of that?
No.
I'm guessing farmland.
Yeah, it seemed like farmland. But the other thing we could have done is, if we were birds, we could have gotten to Santo Domingo in the Dominican Republic.
Oh.
That's about the same distance as the crow flies.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So that
You could walk on water.
If we could have walked on water,
Right.
which we can't. Okay, so that was the end of week 12. By the end of week 13, spooky, 1,703 miles. We almost would have made it to Austin, Texas, which is 1,742.
There you go.
Because that was the closest big city.
Yeah. So a 3-month walk to Austin, Texas, and then some.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's not too bad.
A whole season's worth, really.
A whole season, the entire season of summer,
Yeah.
to get to Austin, Texas, just as it's getting cool. So then the next week, which is week 14, we walked 1,834 miles, and that would get us to Lubbock, Texas. Is it Lubbock or Lubbock?
Lubbock.
Lubbock. It's Lubbock.
Lubbock.
Isn't that like a insult?
I'm
Like
not
a
sure what
lummox.
you're thinking of.
Maybe I'm thinking of Lummock.
A lummox?
I've never heard
lummox?
of this. I mean, flummoxed.
Flummoxed?
Flummoxed.
But that's like...
I'm
it's
flummoxed
like
right now
that's
thinking that
flummoxed.
Lubbock is an insult.
I don't
Dullard?
think that there's...
That's not what I was
I don't know what... Maybe this is just the northerner in me, but I don't know that Lubbock has a good reputation.
I don't know that it does.
I don't know what its reputation is, but I don't know that it's a very welcoming place.
No.
Yeah.
Do you know you lived in...
I did, but I don't recall. Yeah.
No judgment, Lubbock people that are watching or listening.
I mean, I've never been there. Maybe at some point we'll walk around the entire city and actually get to know it. Probably
What
do
you think you would call
maybe.
a Lubbock person? I mean, it sounds like there's a real great potential there for something, but I don't know where's your first...
A Lubbicki?
Lubbicki?
A
that's nice.
Lubbickian?
My first thought was Lubite.
Oh, interesting.
A Lubbite. That's a good one.
Yeah, I would just,
Lubbock.
maybe just Lubbock. I'm a
Lubbock.
Lubbock.
Yeah.
But that's what I think is the insult.
Well,
Luddite.
Luddite.
Maybe
That's
Luddite.
not what I'm thinking though.
I
Very
think you
good.
should Google it.
It might be some. Oh, yeah. Okay, this isn't an insult, but do you know Lummy, the leprechaun?
No.
What?
This might just be a
Oh,
Hyatt.
everyone knows Lummy.
This might just be a Hyatt family thing. I really wasn't sure if it was like a broader thing or not, but it might just be a
sounds like some
Hyatt
family
thing.
folklore.
Lummy the leprechaun is the leprechaun that comes to put coins in your shoes on St. Patrick's Day night if you eat your corned beef and cabbage.
Wow.
Did you guys do that?
No.
Yeah. You know,
No.
I didn't need to be persuaded to eat my corned beef and cabbage.
Okay,
It was-
I did.
Yeah.
Sometimes they were golden pennies.
Wow.
So anyway,
Lubbock, Texas, everybody.
so by the end of week 15, we walked 1,965 miles, which would have taken us just past Santa Fe, New Mexico.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That
15
starts to
miles.
that's like
I mean,
now it
15
starts feeling like a real distance for some reason. Texas doesn't feel like a real distance to me, but New Mexico does.
Oh, okay.
I don't know why. Because I live
well,
there.
because you're
Maybe.
skipping over.
Yeah.
You basically walked. No, New Mexico's next to Texas. I thought Arizona. I got them switched in my mind.
Yeah.
They both are, aren't they?
Next to Texas?
Yeah.
I think there's
Oh, is New
Texas,
Mexico east of
New
Arizona?
Mexico, Arizona,
Oh, okay.
California.
Okay.
Because the Grand Canyon is like between.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But still, that is a ways. And
Yeah,
I
it's
guess
really
maybe because
far.
I have like more associations with Santa Fe. From
Yeah. Yeah, it was nice
friends
that
there.
Santa Fe was one that we could pick because we have a bunch of friends from Santa Fe.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Yeah, that's great. Have you? What was your personal associations? I don't. You never lived out there, right?
I didn't live there, but I visited a bunch of times, and I always enjoy it. It's
Yeah.
an enchanting place. The architecture is beautiful.
Yeah.
But no, it's funny, I guess, because there's just a few, like we have friends from there, but I also have a couple other connections from other friendships or places that are now based in Santa Fe.
Yeah. Yeah. So between Austin and Santa Fe, we've got a lot of personal connections this past 5 weeks.
Yeah.
And now we know if we want to visit the hard way, we can.
Yeah. Well, I was really trying to get a Kansas City in there too.
Yeah.
We ended up in Garden City, Kansas, but I was hoping for the Kansas City.
It would
No.
did it just fall in the middle, I guess, of one of
Yeah,
them?
it was just not.
It's Kansas City, Kansas, not Kansas City, Missouri.
That's the Kansas City, Missouri is the one that we also have connections to. Kansas City, Kansas is on the other side of the
It's always
borderline
confused me.
that I don't know what's going on there. I just don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is confusing. It's confusing that you would have two cities called Kansas City right next to each other in two different states.
Yeah.
And that the one in Missouri, not the one in Kansas, would be the one that we are associated with. But
Yeah.
anyway, that's our mileage report.
That's it.
Very cool.
Yeah, and kind of the takeaway here is now, as we're recording this, we've eclipsed 2,000 miles. It was 1965 at the end of week 15, and now we're at week 16. So
That's true.
we're really,
Covering ground.
racking them up. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, let's talk about this week's walk.
Yeah, let's talk about this week. So this week we've been walking along the coast of Brooklyn from, depending on which direction we're going, we're either walking up from Coney Island or down from Greenpoint. And I think we should start from north to south because I feel like that's the areas that we are all more familiar with already, but then for us at least, we're learning more about the southern part. And Nina, you might know about that area already anyway, but
Yeah, there's definitely, I mean, it's interesting. I won't go too much into the southern part, but it does feel like a more linear path. Once you get down to Shore Parkway, it's like a straight shot-ish.
Yeah.
Whereas a lot of the northern part is like weaving through neighborhoods and a little bit more kind of navigating this northern half of the borough. Starting in Greenpoint, it's like, what's the like tip-off point? What's your...
So on the route for us, we actually walk from our house out to Greenpoint. So we live in Bushwick, so we walk like out Central Ave and then over up to McGorlick Park and then north a little bit to get onto the coast.
Okay.
So where we're actually like linking up with the coast.
Transmitter Park.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So really up at the top corner there.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And then the big reason why we had you on is because of the Greenway. I don't think I mentioned that in the intro, but the Greenway runs sort of right along the coast as well. But do you want to tell us what the Greenway is?
Yeah, totally. So for the past year and a half, I've been working for the Brooklyn Greenway Initiative, which was the organization that over 16 years ago, was founded with the intention of building out a completely connected Brooklyn waterfront greenway. So there was specific areas that were kind of being considered for development back when the organization was starting, that different neighborhoods and community groups banded together and kind of said, we don't want to make this more parking or another, 3-lane highway, but a walkway. We want there to be access. We want people to be able to enjoy this waterfront space. So that, that was about the same time that Brooklyn Bridge Park was also coming up, which was another organization I worked for before this one. And both of those initiatives, combined with the right politicians and the right kind of grease on those wheels, created this beautiful waterfront park pathway that's kind of developed over time. And Bloomberg rezoned the area so that more parks and spaces were kind of encouraged to come up from that. So that's kind of the context, I think, of how the waterfront in Brooklyn particularly has come to be in this iteration that it has now. It was a lot of, before then it was a big shipping and manufacturing hub, as much of the city was, and being so close to the river and so easily accessible from Manhattan, that was kind of the main draw for folks. But as the borough has changed, so have its needs, and park space is pretty crucial part of that.
Yeah.
Greenpoint has some great spaces. Transmitter is really cool. There's Greenpoint Landing, which I don't know if you guys have been by. It's like, the outpost of Brooklyn Ice Cream Factory that's up there? It's like around the corner from it.
Okay. Oh, I think we did walk on there the other day.
Yeah, you can also see the across the way Hunters Point in Queens.
Oh, okay, yeah.
You can see that park from there. So
that's cool. Yeah, it's amazing how many different little extra spaces there are along the way. Totally. I mean, we're mostly taking advantage of the walking paths, and we're kind of moving through and occasionally stopping in one to eat a sandwich or take a break or do a stretch or just to see it. But there's more little park spaces than like we can even get to in a week.
Yeah, there's a lot to. I mean, it's a great thing, but it's also a little, I think, a frustration to me that they're not all connected, or that they aren't all things that you can like walk through to the next one. But I guess that's what makes them each so distinct and unique, is that they kind of have only one access point, and the community and the circumstance of the view or whatever else is going on over there can change it. So, for example, up in Transmitter or at Greenpoint Landing, the view of Manhattan is like midtown, whereas we're viewing downtown from here. And that changes it in the Greenpoint community, like the influence of the Polish neighborhood folks and the new kind of developments there have also really shifted, I think, the way those parks kind of operate and who they're serving, so that's interesting.
And then the parks along Kent and Williamsburg, like between Domino and then I guess Brooklyn Inlet Park, but also they just renamed it
Marsha P. Johnson?
Marsha P. Johnson, yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think the state parks have made I don't know who instigated this initiative, but renaming or trying to name the state parks after influential people of color, which is really awesome.
Yeah. Has that just been over the last couple months while there have been so many Black Lives Matter protests, or was that something that was happening?
I think it might have been in process. Shirley Chisholm, which is at the bottom of Brooklyn, was already named Shirley Chisholm before this, but it was also it's a brand new park. It just opened the past year.
Okay.
So it might also be the kind of thing like that one opened, and then they were like, "Well, why don't we do the same thing with Bushwick Inlet?" It's already, nobody knows, or it's good to distinguish it more explicitly, giving that kind of name to it, as opposed to Bushwick Inlet, which just sounds kind of like a random location,
Right. Right. I guess it's nice too because it gives people, if they don't know already who these people are, then it gives them a chance to kind of research and find out. And if they do know who that person is, then they just feel nice that they have a park named after them.
Yeah, right. And there are so many parks named after so many people all over the country. Not enough for activists and folks that were not necessarily park people or politicians.
Right.
So it's a different
I met
thing.
Chuck Schumer in that park.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
You did?
Yeah, I was walking around just a random weekend day, and there were these magazines that were being given out somewhere else in Williamsburg, and they had these cutouts of Marlon Brando's face in the magazine. It was like a newsprint cutout. And I cut it out, and then I was wearing it around the park, and then I ran into Chuck Schumer, and I was like, "Can I take a picture with you?" And he was like, "Sure." And then, which honestly, I don't think he would do it now. His social media was not as like meaning. I just he was like, "Who are you supposed to be?"
A newer, how many years ago?
This is 2011, something like that.
Yeah, I mean he's risen up in rank since then.
Yeah,
so it's also
he was already a senator by then, right?
Yeah.
But he wasn't. Yeah, now he's like big time.
He wasn't the minority
big
speaker
boy
of the House or
whatever.
Yeah. And so he was like...
I think you're right. I think that's what it is. Yeah.
He was like, "Who are you supposed to be?" And I was like, "Marlon Brando." And he was like, "You're a little thin for Marlon Brando." And then, I got the picture. And periodically I make it my Facebook profile picture.
I've seen that picture now that you're telling the story. I remember seeing that photo, and it's funny.
You guys know, I assume you know, since you're walking through Red Hook, that On the Waterfront was based in Red Hook.
The movie with Marlon Brando?
That makes sense, though. Yeah.
I watched that just a couple years ago.
Could have been a contender.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's all here, which is like it feels so far away from like our reference points of Red Hook, or being here now and being like, oh, that story is supposed to be about. I can't relate to the like gritty working class Marlon Brando that would have lived in Red Hook. I don't know them personally.
Yeah.
But it's a cool idea to think about.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I do think that Red Hook still has a little bit of that.
Totally.
Like, there's still people that fish. There's still, like, a lot of boat culture.
Yeah, definitely.
But the boat culture is, like, it's some industry, but it's also just, like, people that ride boats or, like, live on a boat or kind of go to Burning Man on their boat or something, like.
Right.
Go to Burning Man
Well,
on
and
their
it's
boat.
like, it's always this kind of, like, that's a Hollywood glamorized version of Red Hook from that era.
Right.
That we then have to, like, retranspose to now, that some people probably are living out that fantasy, but other people are probably totally ignorant of it.
Right.
Yeah. There's that, what's the other section? I think it's Red Hook, but also where we walk through that kind of like Main Street-y, you know, where we talked about it one of our first podcasts, because one of the actually noteworthy things about this walk is that the first half to maybe even 2/3 of it is a replay of our week 1 walk, which is First Impressions North Brooklyn.
You're talking about Columbia Street waterfront.
Columbia Street waterfront, yeah, which is not, it's like Red Hook adjacent, right? But what's, I don't know.
Right, it's like
Is
Carroll
it like
Gardens,
Cobble
Cobble Hill.
Okay.
Yeah.
Border, but it's really a no man's land between Brooklyn Bridge Park, Brooklyn Heights, and not Brooklyn Heights. No, yeah, Brooklyn Heights and Red Hook.
Yeah.
It's kind of a gray area.
But what I was going to say is there's something about that area and Red Hook as well, to an extent, that actually kind of has more of a New England maritime vibe to me, that like, or maybe even like South Street Seaport-y a little bit.
Sure.
That is, over in Manhattan. That is, unique to Brooklyn, at least presently. I can't think of any analogies to that anywhere else along the coast.
To the way that it feels down there?
Yeah. Like there was, I guess, I mean, I'm sure it felt very gritty at some point too. And then it got rehabbed, and like basically when they burnished it up, that was what was left, you know, was this kind of, I don't know. It reminds me of,
it's industrial shipping, but then now the shipping has fallen apart, kind of, so it's not as active. It's kind of like skeleton of what it was.
Yeah. And there's also like lobster houses and, you know, places to.
Oh yeah,
maybe
the
that.
lobster
I mean,
cones.
that is what I think of when I think of New England waterfront.
Well, and then particularly that Columbia Street area, I doubt that this is the architecture style, but it's like kind of like Federalist, kind of like these stout brick houses. You know, something about that reminds me like more of a Rhode Island vibe.
Right. I will say, the offices of Brooklyn Greenway are on Columbia Street.
Yeah.
Oh.
That area, the stretch along the waterfront specifically, there's like a beer distributor that's on the corner between Brooklyn Bridge Park and then Columbia Street, but after that is all Port Authority buildings.
Oh,
so,
okay.
Port Authority, or it's like, I don't really know what to make of the Port Authority agency. It's a different specific thing. It's kind of more. It kind of goes in between New Jersey and New York. Like it kind of crosses those state lines. But that, I guess, might be why structurally. And I think it was built kind of like 70s, 80s into that. So maybe that's my estimation of timeline. So maybe it's the architecture from that time frame as well.
That gives you those feelings.
Yeah. Sort of.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's always the something about the waterfront is just that it's always shifting. You know, it's always a constantly kind of evolving space, which is special, but also like makes it kind of hard to pin down and complicated to like really set in stone or make like established landscape for. BDP is also like this park space has evolved a lot over the past 10 years, but it's also the kind of thing, due to climate change, due to industrialization, like who knows how much of it's gonna stay the same in another 10 years. Like it might be around and it might stay similar, but I'm also fully anticipating at least some of it just like becoming it totally repurposed in another way that we don't know yet.
Right.
Which is cool.
Was that ever something that you took into consideration, or that the organizations you worked with took into consideration, like creating like flood barriers or anything like that when you were doing the greenway or the park?
Yeah, I mean, I was mostly dealing in operations with BBP, so I was kind of the contact for staff and making sure that everybody had what they needed to do their jobs across all departments. But there is like a capital projects team that was building actively, managing construction projects within Brooklyn Bridge Park that I would work with to know when there was load in and load out needed for that, or when the construction work of a certain area would be done, which would affect the staff, like in terms of where they could be working, or if we needed signage, or how we wanted to redirect people away from that space, and how long that was going to be in effect. And I think that's a perpetual priority for the park. I can share two specific projects. One I know is that there's certain areas, actually over here, we'll pass it. There's these jagged rocks, which are also known as riprap, which is supposed to be kind of a flood barrier for waves if they crash up, or the water levels get higher to kind of like absorb some of that water, provide a subtle barrier.
Okay.
And there's a certain area between Pier 4 and 5, or there is no Pier 4, but there's a certain space where there's riprap that like is supposed to deal with tidal flooding and go underneath this walkway.
Oh, okay.
And then it'll go back out for storms. So that's one consideration architecturally and developing landscape wise. And then another one is that all of these piers were built before they were also part of the Port Authority complex. And when the piers were originally constructed, they were on wooden piles. The wooden piles obviously cannot sustain themselves forever. So there's a huge underground or underwater multi-million-dollar project happening currently for all of the piers to essentially replace these piles with more strong, sustainable, like cement pillars, or like fill them in and wrap them in a way that they won't rot out and fall. Because if you build a park on top of wood pillars, you want to make sure that they stick around. So it's kind of a crazy project. We might pass some divers or like barge where you'll see the construction. It's very gray because you might have passed it in the past.
I did notice that this week. I had no idea what was going on.
Yeah, nobody does. It's one of those like funny kind of like, it's not a secret because like it's a public it's a public initiative and it's city funded, but like it's also the kind of thing that's not really obvious to anyone looking at it, because why would you know what's going on? So
I almost wonder why. I mean, I wonder if it would be beneficial, like politically, to let people know that that's happening, or if it would not be. It's like on one hand, it's saying, hey, we're doing something to protect the infrastructure of these public spaces so that everyone that lives here can use them forever, or whatever, as long as
in perpetuity,
humans are whatever. It's a good thing for like climate change. We're recognizing it and we want to make sure our city is safe. But then on the other hand, it's like, how much money is it? Like, I don't know if people would then start to
that's true
dive
of, like,
in.
a lot
Maybe
of
they just want to do it.
That's true of a lot of initiatives at BBP and in general. I mean, conversely, like I don't know the exact numbers and comparisons, but like building out the Greenway,
Mm-hmm.
even in a temporary format, and connecting all of the pathways,
Yeah.
comparative, like that capital would probably be a drop in the bucket to finish the full connection of the Brooklyn Waterfront Greenway.
Okay.
And it's a hard thing to appreciate, conserving something that's already been built versus building something new. You know,
Right.
people don't always respond to like, oh, we're just like cleaning up the work we should have done maybe before we built the park in the first place. You know,
Right.
Yeah.
but it's a chicken or the egg. Like, people wouldn't have appreciated this park, wouldn't have been able to access it if they spent the first 5 years just reinforcing the pillars.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
Right. Because then it would be the opposite, where people would be like, I thought this park was going to be, like, it took them forever to build this park. Yeah.
Right. And a lot of, I mean, this park is, I think they've done a really good job, and I think they make a very strong point of making it as inclusive and accessible to as many people from throughout the borough as possible.
Yeah.
But I know it's also like a perpetual struggle between the neighborhood of Brooklyn Heights and Dumbo, where it's based, and where like most of the population experiences it, and then the tourism. You know, there's a lot of competing audiences in public space that you can't make everybody happy, but you try to do your best, or you try to do what you think is the most right or most just way of making it accessible.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, would you know offhand? I don't know. Like this particular area where we're sitting. How long ago did this come online?
I think this space, I want to say this is 10 years old. I think originally the earlier part of BBP was on the other side of the Brooklyn Bridge.
Okay.
And that was maybe 2005, 2006 that the first pieces were being built. This whole area was actually a landfill.
Yeah.
This pier in specific, because it's much wider than the piers beyond it. So I think this is all really a landfill, Pier 1. It was also like on the other, there were like a few different park spaces. There was the Dumbo Playground and Park there, but then there was also Empire Fulton State Park, which was a state park.
Okay.
And it got absorbed into BBP and like traded off. So there's different jurisdictions that kind of came together and like made this collective land one coherent space that it wasn't necessarily to begin with. So, but Pier 1 is a former landfill, that much I know. And I believe it's 10 years old this year. So.
Yeah, because I mean, I've been here in the city more or less for like 11, 12 years, something like that, 2008 or thereabouts. And, you know, I just started, most of that beginning time I had a car, and I just always remember driving along the BQE and just seeing construction always here and being like, well, that's going to be something someday, you know? And then I never really, or at least in my world, it was never like a fanfare of like, oh, something's open. It was just all of a sudden it was like, oh, it's like this thing just appeared. But it didn't really it just appeared in my world. It had been worked on intensely for a long period of time.
I do remember, I think we were even talking about it on the way down here, but I do remember like when we lived over there, like in one of those buildings right there, in 2009 into 2010, I think was when I really understood that something was happening here. And I remember walking across the bridge to check out Brooklyn Bridge Park for the first time. Yeah. And that was when it was only like a little chunk right near the bridge. Yeah. But yeah, also then living in Gowanus and riding on the BQE a lot. And I guess, because it was under construction, like it just kept expanding and expanding. And I didn't even realize how big it had gotten until we started walking through it. You know, when you were working here, you would reference Brooklyn Bridge Park all the time, and I knew it as like what I had in my memory from like whatever, 2009 to 2012-ish.
Yeah.
And now I actually understand what it is that you were talking about that whole time.
Yeah. It's also strange because like it's all of this. My experience with the Greenway and with BBP is that, you know, they're linear-ish spaces, right? Like this park is made up of piers. It's not like Prospect Park or Central Park that's like a chunk of land in the center,
right,
with stuff around it. It's like this is the edge that it's walking, and in a certain way it's because you can wrap around it and there's no like real boundary, except the boundary is the water, but like there's this way that it becomes more expansive than you know, because you have this view, or because the water is like one half of it, that you experience it differently than I think I have, at least with Prospect Park or Central Park. You know, you walk through those spaces, and on either side you're like, okay, now we're not in the park.
Right.
Whereas Brooklyn Bridge Park, kind of like, you dip in and out of it, and you might not even realize that you're in it until you're out on the water, and you're like, oh, now we're really in it.
Right. Yeah, especially like if you go to one of those restaurants down at the southern end there. I feel like I have gone to that Fornino a couple times, and whenever I'm invited to go there, now I've been there a couple times, and I'm like, oh yeah, that's that nice restaurant in the park.
Right.
But I think the first time I got to the park, or to the restaurant, and was like, am I in the park? Am I not in the park? I don't know. It's really nice.
Right.
And it is. It's cool.
Yeah, and some of it is also like, because this park and its model is very unique. I don't know if like you guys or if I've explained it, or if I should re-explain it, but some of the buildings in the park are technically part of the park. So one hotel, Pier House, these are residencies that part of their construction and part of the property tax contributes to the park.
Oh,
so
that's cool.
Yeah, it's awesome. And I mean, obviously for the people that live there, it's an amenity to them, but it's also this kind of strange dynamic, because it's like, to some people this is their backyard, you know.
Right.
So it changes their relationship to the space, for better and for worse, depending on the circumstance.
Yeah.
And that's true, like Fornino, but also the development around there that just finished. There's these big new high-rise buildings that took years to build, and that was like partially a development of Brooklyn Bridge Park. Like, they were involved in the planning and execution of those buildings. So there's a diversity in it, because it's not just like landscape architecture. It's not like Brooklyn Bridge Park like designed the buildings, but there were certain elements of consideration being adjacent to the park space and being a part of the park landscape.
Yeah, and that's so interesting, coming from the walk we did last week with Olmsted and Vox, and Olmsted being very strictly a public space for, you know, and like no investment otherwise, and that being a concept that endured for such a long time, and still endures as the principal version. But yeah, thinking about investments in a passive way as a way to sustain a park is interesting as well.
Yeah. I mean, in terms of access and upkeep, obviously you want the public to appreciate and enjoy the space, and it makes it much more rewarding, I think. Like, who wants to go to a park where no one can, only like certain people can go to? That feels really horrible.
Yeah, of course not.
But for the amount of landscaping, the amount of cleanup and maintenance, it's not a sustainable model to make it exclusively public, especially if the taxes don't really reflect that. Like, you know, depending on the city budget and the priorities of that, this kind of insulates at least BBP from some of the economic instability of the time, you know.
Yeah.
Which is
and somewhere like, I mean, I'm not as familiar with Prospect Park, but with Central Park, you know, that's getting a lot of private donations in order to run as well, and so this idea that it's somehow exclusively a public enterprise is not entirely accurate, you know?
Right. Yeah, it's always a dynamic, I think. Like the conservancies that are associated with both Prospect and Central Park are a huge benefit to their spaces.
Yeah. An area that I don't know if there's a conservancy or probably not, but the lower third of our walk, which you may know the name, and it doesn't. I don't know, but the area around the Bell Parkway, essentially.
Shore Parkway.
Shore Parkway.
Shore Parkway Greenway.
From starting on this walk, we pick it up right at Owl's Head Park, and then we walk all the way down to, I think there's like a tennis court complex that might be Bay Ridge or Coney Island. It's right on the border. That area there, we've had exceptionally good weather this whole week, and on the left side, on one side, depending on which direction you're walking it, there's the Bell Parkway, cars going.
Yeah.
And then on the other side is the upper bay of Brooklyn. And each day I've been there, and particularly yesterday, I would say, I've really been struck with the naturalness of it in a way that was like kind of emotional yesterday. And in a way that it's also, I don't know if it's despite the traffic, the cars on one side, or because of the traffic, because there's no buildings around. So it's just kind of like a white noise situation, but there's no commerce or anything going on.
Yeah.
But looking out at the water, and with it being sunny pretty much every day, and also pretty windy this week.
Yeah.
And the chop of the sea going, and sometimes the massive freight boats coming in, you know. It really just brought me to a place where I could imagine being like a sailor, or just like it really strips away the city in a way and brings you back to just the naturalness of that space where there's many different islands that you can see at one time, and this span of sea that's not like oceanic but like very large, and yeah, it really felt like a special area that you might not necessarily have an understanding of unless you're living there, you know?
Yeah, I do. I feel like it's because it's between a highway and a waterway, and there's no developments like buildings or like residencies on the pathway. It's kind of like explicit in what it's used for, access-wise. Like this up here, the Greenway, like you're going between places. It's a mode of transportation. It's also a mode of exercise, and you're accessing different points along the way. And you can access different park spaces on Shore Parkway, but they're really just recreational or just athletic. Like it's not the kind of space where you're like going to meet up with a friend in the middle of it.
Right.
Yeah.
You can't do that so well. Oh, crying baby. If anyone hears that, just no.
We didn't do that.
Yeah.
But anyway, I think that I don't know that there is a specific community group there. I will say that on the other side of the highway, there's a military base.
Yeah.
Is that Fort Hamilton?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's a big piece of it. And with the military base, I think there's also like a hospital, and there's a golf course. There's also like neighborhoods and residences, but I think that that's part of what also makes it even more secluded.
Right.
In that those spaces are not like necessarily connected or like using the Greenway in a way that's like public facing and conservationally minded.
Right.
Right.
But it is also the fact that it's so, again, I don't know if linear is the right word, but that it's like you're walking directionally one way or the other. I think definitely has some form of nature to it. It's like on either side of you, you're seeing like a waterway of transportation, a driving transportation, and then your foot or bike transportation.
Yeah.
And something about that makes it, I don't know.
And I've certainly driven the Belt Parkway a number of times,
yeah.
but I don't think that either I'm in traffic and I'm mad that I'm in traffic, or I'm just going to wherever I'm going. You know, I do think
it's fast. You can't take a minute to look over and like, oh, look at that beautiful view. It's not.
Yeah. I have always noticed people fishing there, though. I think because I've also driven there mostly, and I'll see people fishing, and I think, like, how did they get there? Like, that's always what I think when I see them is, like, because there's no crosses. And I guess, I mean, we've seen people now. I mean, we've gotten there. We've walked there. We've seen people biking. We've seen the fishermen have their, bikes with
there's
the
like little
poles
lot
on them.
turnoffs.
Oh, there are a few.
You've passed.
Every 3/4 of a mile to a mile, there's an overpass over so you can get on that way.
Yeah.
Or there's, I just meant like there's like a turnoff that's like a small strip of parking spots.
You're correct. There's
two
of those, I think.
There's a couple of those.
Yeah, I mean, it's not much, and it's odd that that's how people would get there, but to some that's...
But some people, that's how they get there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll also plug, there is a ferry stop now.
Oh, yeah.
At Veterans Memorial Pier.
Yeah.
Yes.
And they were trying to make one.
Sat there the other day, right?
We did.
It's right at the base of Bay Ridge?
A
little south of Bay Ridge? Okay,
yeah.
Yeah. They had really cool picnic tables there.
Yeah.
Like very wide and kind of like curved.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of birds.
Yeah.
Oh.
At least that's what I remember. A lot of pigeons.
Yeah.
Oh, there were kids feeding the pigeons, which always bothers me when I see people feeding the pigeons. But
so something that's been a really interesting quirk of this week, and I will already preface it by saying I'm pretty well out of my depth with explaining why. But this particular week, there have been scores and scores of Hasidic families out along the coast. And I think it might have to do with holidays.
It is.
For Sukkot. Sukkot. Again, out of my depth. But
I believe Sukkah is the name of the
structure.
hut, and
Yes.
Sukkot is the name of the holiday.
Yes. So starting on Tuesday when I was by myself, but it's happened most every day, sometime around after 3 o'clock or so. And I don't know if that has something to do with there are activities that take up the earlier hours this week, but there have been people in families enjoying the park, thousands upon thousands of people, to the point where I really don't think I've seen as many Hasidic Jews cumulatively as I had on like Tuesday or Thursday of this week. And it was really impressive and cool to see these spaces being used in such a way, you know?
Yeah, I remember when I was working at BBP when this would happen and being like, oh my God, it's like Hasid, like week. That's like, but it's only, I mean, it's not like they are never here, but like this week in particular, it's like a festival.
Yeah.
But it's definitely because of Sukkot, but also, or Sukkot. Now you got me confused. But I think that at least my understanding as a very, very vague Jew, is that most of the morning is taken up with prayer, and there's a certain window of time before sundown to like have a little bit of recreation, but you're not supposed to be using electronics or anything if possible. Also, it's like building the hut. Ideally, you're collecting branches and things from park spaces. So I don't know that they're like foraging and like stealing things, but there's like, if you can find some pieces of
like
stuff.
Some flowers.
I've been seeing a lot of palm branches in plastic or something similar that people are purchasing. It's typically purchased. Like I don't think people are coming and like just looking for branches. But I
haven't noticed anyone doing that. But
that's my own. I guess that's my story I'm telling myself.
Oh, it makes sense. We kind of assumed that maybe the morning was time for prayer, so it's,
Yeah.
I guess we're all in agreement
And
on that. But then it also is like the whole holiday is about recreating the time that was spent being nomadic.
Right. So there's a wanderingness.
Yeah, and so it's like the sukkah, the hut, is meant to represent like the sort of flimsy structure that people would have been living in, and then all of that being outside and being in nature. So it kind of makes sense that you would go to, if you're living in the city, this is like the most nature that you can get to easily.
Yeah.
I'll also just, one added piece, I think, is that between Crown Heights and Williamsburg, which are the two primary Orthodox neighborhoods, this park is like equal distance.
Oh, right.
So there's a certain draw, especially if you've got family on either, like that they can meet here.
Yeah.
Collective.
Oh, that makes sense.
Spending time and being in the space. So I think that also geographically is why maybe you guys, like, you know, you could go to any park. They could have gone to a park in their neighborhood or to like Prospect Park.
Yeah.
I don't think the same thing happens in Prospect Park.
Well, we've been seeing, like, really along the coast. It's like we saw a bunch of Hasidic people in Owl's Head, in Sunset Park, in Brooklyn Bridge Park.
That's cool.
The Sunset Park in Owl's Head I was a little surprised by, but maybe there's probably communities there, or they're just like nice parks.
Yeah, I mean, I guess there are more communities than I'm acknowledging in southern Brooklyn.
Yeah.
I just don't know them as well.
Yeah.
It's interesting when you're talking about the use of electronics and I guess the real litigation that goes on with which, as technology advances, what's considered appropriate or not to use.
Yeah.
And the hoverboards are like very popular with the kids.
In the Hasidic community?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
I mean,
I wonder what, like, there was almost certainly a conversation that happened with like leaders to decide whether or not that was okay. You know?
Like if that counts as an electronic?
Or and I wonder.
Yeah, it seems like definitely a certain type of gray area. I guess my thought about the electronic thing also is that I remember specifically when this time of year happened, there would be an inundation of calls to the park asking if certain things were open, where certain things were, that I'm like, you can just Google search it. Don't you know? And they won't do that.
Right.
They can't do that.
Right.
But they can make calls.
Yeah.
But I think it was only ever the men. It was like there's certain limitations.
Yeah. It might even be from like a house phone or, not from this, like, or I don't know.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that there is a logic. I don't always know what it is.
Yeah. It's endlessly fascinating to me, when I think just because I don't belong to a community per se. I mean, in some ways there's like typical etiquette that's expected of me by certain people, but it's ultimately up to me whether or not I'm gonna do that or not, and then those people will either be my friends or not.
Yeah.
Right.
But I've never belonged to a community really where there's very clear ways of living, like day to day for me, and so it really is just like, it's really interesting, and I'm just kind of endlessly wondering how that all works.
Yeah, I've been asked if I'm Jewish, like, I don't know, 8 or 10 times this week, and I really want to be like, yes, because I was like, what's next? I mean, we did a little bit of reading on it, and I understand it's like saying prayers with people and being offered the opportunity to participate in traditions and like have a community thing, and also it seems like they gain some spiritual points or possibly community points as well. But
it's kind of an indoctrination technique, or like bringing people back into the fold that have fallen wayward. I mean, it's not that judgmental.
No,
just like,
but like
kind
a
of
welcoming
incentive.
Yeah.
It's funny. That's happened to me a couple times as well. And
what do you say?
deny it usually,
Oh.
which I feel bad because I know that's not as a Jew I should, but I don't know Hebrew. I don't really want to be prayed with, and it's usually men asking me, and then I just kind of am turned off by that. Like I'm
Right.
kind of like, ugh.
Yeah.
It was funny, once it happened with Emily, our friend, and she and I both just immediately said no,
Oh,
because I think it was just like a knee-jerk thing. But then
yeah.
we told her mom, and we were like, how did they know that we were Jewish? And she was like, it's because you've got long torsos and short legs. And I was like, what? So I guess there's like a Jewish woman body type that I
Oh,
didn't know that we
wow.
had or something, which is very funny.
Oh, that's
Because I mean, I'm sure it's also just like faces or
I've always
whatever.
wondered why I'm never asked.
You've got too.
Is it
Your
my
legs are too
legs?
tall. Your legs are too long.
All right.
It's these short
yeah.
legs that Emily and I have.
I mean, I think if it were also an added thing is if I were Jewish and I was asked during my day-to-day, I would be basically not inclined. But the current circumstances that
Right.
we're just roaming the city, you
Right.
know, it's like,
Yeah.
I have time, whatever, let's do whatever you
and
want,
it's
you know?
it's like interesting and fascinating, and like I also would love to be part of it, but like there's also, you don't want to because you don't want to mess up the whole thing. Like, you know, Mike's Catholic and I'm not, and whenever I go to church with his family, I can't take communion because I would like mess up the magic. Because I don't believe the
Right.
same thing. Like I don't
That's my
believe that
exact
it's
quote, by the way.
actually blood.
No, you'll mess up the magic.
Yeah, well,
You're not
but
allowed.
I don't want to do it because I don't want to mess up the magic. Even if I don't believe in the magic, like I still don't want to mess up the magic.
Yeah.
Right. You don't want
So.
to take it, and that's part of like. I mean, I guess I feel like sometimes I feel like I'm messing up the magic, or like, you know, if I am one of God's chosen Jew people, and I'm denying it to these others that are asking, maybe I'm forsaking. But I also
Oh.
think it's between me and him.
Yeah.
And you can't, you know, you can't make me one way or another.
Right.
So.
Yeah.
Joanna, I was right next to you and you took me all the
So I thought this is a good transition, actually.
Yeah.
I just kind of came up with this as we were talking, and I don't think that we've missed any guests that this applied to, and if we have, I'm sorry. However, I think you may be the first guest we've had so far that has lived in both Los Angeles and New York.
Okay.
And I thought it might be nice to ask our guests that have had that experience to give some sort of comparison, what they thought about both locations,
Oh.
and
Okay.
kind of, you know, because
Wait.
those two cities are the most compared cities, frequently compared.
Well, they're
in
the
our country.
largest population cities in the country.
Mhm. And they're also, you know, in terms of creation of creative output, too prominent, if not the most two prominent cities.
Yeah, I guess in our particular industries world, creative wise,
Yeah.
there's a lot of like, am I going to be on the West Coast or the East Coast? Am I going to be bi-coastal? What am I
Yeah.
going to do? You know.
Yeah. What does that? What
Yeah.
are those reputations?
So I guess so this will be a two-part direction.
Wait, I want to understand one question before you go.
Of course, yeah.
So you're saying you asked people this, but
No,
none of them.
I don't. This is the first time this question is being asked because
Okay.
I don't think
Anyone
any
else
guest
lived in
has
LA
had this
before.
experience.
Okay.
But I think we will have other people that'll have this experience at some
Probably.
point.
I see.
Yeah.
So I guess because you're not originally from New York, but if you could tell us about, you know, your original coming here, and then you know, your experiences of LA, and we'll just go from there.
Sure. I mean, I came to I'm from New England, so I have closer familiarity with New York. Came here intermittently when I was a kid. Saw a Broadway show, did a summer camp program, other things, and then when I was applying for college, I did apply to some schools in California, but I hadn't been that often, and it was so much farther away. My family definitely was concerned, I think, with the idea of me being so far from home. So when I was accepted to new school, I felt like that was the way to go, and I did like the energy of New York, the intensity of the place. So that was part of the draw for me. And I think it was a really fun experience to be here in college. Jesse and I, plenty of memories, plenty of fun experiences. Having New York as your campus, as they pitch it, is cool, but also very different than they pitch it, right? Like it's actually a lot more of a bubble than you realize in certain ways. It's very self-referential and very like insular in a really interesting way, because I think, like you get exposed to people from different places and different elements, but it's also, there's this like gravity to this place that kind of keeps you centered here. And to my experience, didn't feel like I got lost, certainly at certain times in Manhattan and in Brooklyn and different boroughs, like try to give myself adventures, but I also felt like there was always the subway, there were always people around. I was guarded and smart enough, and I had to build up more of a guard from college here, that I think I was, by the end of the 4 years, really conscious of the fact that I was somewhat jaded and somewhat avoidant of being as open creatively as I wanted to be. Which is part of the reason I left the city, I think. I felt enough awareness of New York as a place that I knew I would have to commit myself to being here for like 10 years to make enough money, get by, and like live the way I wanted to. It was a moment of economic downturn again, so that was also this like, it's going to be really hard. It was going to be really hard in LA, but I thought like, at least in LA I'm starting new. I get to be the new kid in a new place, and the quality of life and the expectations of how you live are different. And I just felt like by the end of school, everyone goes through a lot, the college experience, but I'd had a lot of transitions with my family and my life overall that I also recognized, like, my surroundings were changing, and me staying in the same place was not going to serve me mentally the way that I needed it to.
Right.
Which is all motivation as to why I came to LA. And going to LA definitely, I think, forced me open again in a different way. Finding creative communities, finding audiences. I think anybody after college is like doing that anyway. Doing it without the same network or without the established relationships that I'd created here was more challenging than I'd expected. And I definitely think I like came into LA with this like glamorous expectation that I somehow would meet and formulate a whole creative community there that would be comparable to my experience in New York. And that's just not the case, It's a different world. Everybody's spread out. You might have a community, but you also have to have a very deep investment in maintaining it. I think you have to do that here as well, but it's you can also just run into people.
Right.
Or it's easier for people to meet up, and depending on there are people you might not see in LA or you might not collaborate with, but they'll like be in the periphery, and ideally one day you'll align, but you won't necessarily have that opportunity for a while, you know? So I guess any more specifics about LA I would be happy to share, but I just think that I spent 4 years there, 4 years here, and again, at the end of the 4 years in LA, things in terms of my family and my life, I felt like were coming to a point where I don't know if I've just been on a 4-year track, and this is like a loop I come back to. So there was this cycle of evaluation after 4 years. But it feels like the kind of place I realized that at that point I wasn't finding and self-actualizing myself the way that I had hoped I would there. I think there were certain things I became better at, certain moments where I self-actualized and got over a hump, but then it's easy to slump back into it, and depending on what's going on otherwise, there's so much other context that can inform your creative practice.
Yeah.
And inform the people you're around. And I've heard the analogy about LA, like New York is kind of like a river. If we're gonna go bodies of water.
Sure.
New York is kind of a river. You go with the flow. It's constantly moving and shifting and progressing in some form or another, and you can catch it or you can't, or you can like jump out of the water and then back in, and you'll be moving the whole time. LA is more of like a lake or a pond where you get in the water, and if you stay in your area, you'll stay with the circumstances you're in. And if you really want something, you can get to the other end of the lake or the other end of the pond, but you have to perpetually be swimming yourself, taking yourself on that journey through that. And that, because it's all so spread out, and because there's this motivation or this manifest destiny mindset, it's partially that I think that people have to constantly continue to recreate and reevaluate and reformulate. Whereas in New York, things evolve and just become something new without much realization until it's already happened, right? Like this park just built in time. Who knew? So yeah, I guess those are my comparisons. There's definitely neighborhoods and places that are geographically, I would compare, like socioeconomically similar.
Right.
And I've had plenty of people, not every time. There are plenty of folks from the Northeast that when I tell them I lived in LA, or when anyone else from LA that lived in LA talks about it, there's so much disdain and resentment and judgment of the place.
Yeah.
I don't have that, and I refuse to view it that way. My house caught on fire before I left LA, and my car was stolen. Like these are unfortunate events, but I believe it was it's a special place, and I have a deep affection for it. I just know that it's ultimately not what has motivated me and supported me growing.
Yeah.
Or it did up to a point, and I realized that I'd reached that point.
Yeah.
And maybe it'll do it again someday, but for now, I needed to be somewhere else.
Yeah. So I think I could infer the answer to this question based on your analogy. But if you were to say, kind of, when you talk about your self-actualization, the ratio to which that actualization was internally motivated versus externally motivated, like the actual city itself, doing something to you, it sounds like that in your experience that the changes that occurred while in LA were internally motivated, whereas in New York they might be acting on you just kind of as a day-to-day thing?
Yeah, sure, I'd say that. I think that's part of what's good and difficult for me about New York as well, is that like their external motivations or external events that self-actualize you or motivate you into action, but that kind of forces more reactionary behavior occasionally, or constantly. So when I was in LA and I was deciding I was coming back to New York, I made some decisions in terms of my career path where I was like, I've been working in film. I didn't want to commit to one avenue of the industry, and I recognized that I was also working in places and spaces, and that I'd been working in that realm, and so I wanted to push myself towards parks and push myself towards just like facilities. And I think that served me well in transitioning back to New York. But then once I got into this world, I think that like it's taken on more shape, and I've just kind of been constantly either catching up or like fighting it. And I think that's not really the way you want to work in a career, I don't think, you know. So that's part of where like my next phase or my next ambition is kind of recognizing all of that and trying to think through how I can avoid doing that again, making that same mistake the same way. LA's internal choices, I found a theater I liked. I self-actualized, like getting involved in that space, and I sought out different opportunities, and I did enjoy a lot of the work I did. I just think I had more, because it was so internally driven, I had a lot of indecision because it felt like, oh, there's no one telling me what to do.
Right.
There's no opportunity just jumping out at me, or opportunity being taken away that's like informing my choices. So you want to find a balance, and I think that that's the part that's part of why people like to be bi-coastal, I think, is that there's a certain way you like the idea of being able to balance those internal and external factors. But it doesn't always work, and it is a whole other undertaking to actually be a bi-coastal person.
Yeah.
Financially and otherwise, you know.
Yeah.
So I'm excited for I feel like there's got to be another place that has creative opportunities, or I mean, I know other places have creative opportunities, but has maybe less of these push and pull qualities to it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think because LA and New York are just so huge and like set, we know that these creative communities have been here for a really long time and will be in both of those places for a really long time, regardless of what anybody might be saying about New York right now, which I get so mad anytime I hear anyone talk poorly about New York right now. It's so annoying. But the creative community is going to be here. Like, there's just, it might not be the people that, you know, lived here in the 90s or early 2000s or something that think they know. It changes neighborhoods, it changes form, it changes people. Like, I don't know. Anybody that says that like the cool New York is dead is just, they're old, and they're like maybe you just need to look and open your eyes and find it, you know? Right.
Yeah.
Or my caveat, I'll just like,
I
said all of that about LA. I'll say the same thing about New York.
Yeah.
I'm not, like, it's not that I don't think this place is creatively fulfilling in any way. It's just about what's right for you.
Yeah.
At any given point. But it's always going to have that creative energy to it.
Yeah. Yeah, I didn't think that you were.
I know.
You're not the person I'm talking about.
There's
all these articles
telling the
coming
audience.
out and stuff.
Yeah, I know.
But in terms of, I was mostly thinking that in terms of like where another place could be.
Yeah.
And I think it's hard because a lot of other cities, I think their creative potential isn't set in stone yet. Like, there's these like Austin or Nashville or even like Chicago, and like a lot of these places have had creative types of people in them for a while, but they're just not quite as like substantial as New York or LA, or like withstanding, or
I mean, I'm sure people from those areas would argue differently. I think
probably.
I've like had this a bunch of stuff written down about this, and I don't think this is where it's going to come out today either, but maybe it will one time. But I think maybe the difference between areas like that and like a New York or an LA is its greatest strength is its greatest weakness, which is just this level of conceitedness that is so extreme, where it's like, no, it'll never die, and if you're gonna leave, see ya. You know, like there's there, and even if it got down to the very bottom of the barrel where it was like dead, or even if it was dead for 20 years, eventually it's going to rise again, and then the narrative is self-fulfilling. It's always like, it was awful back then and I survived it. And like there's always going to be somebody that's going to tell a story about New York or LA probably that will glorify whatever was considered the dead time.
Yeah.
So, but then the consequence of that is that you're constantly having to defend what is a terrible situation sometimes, you know?
But I also think, I think what you're realizing, Nina, because you're not really, I think in your comparison between New York and LA, you're not really saying like the city is good, or like you're not really placing a judgment, which I appreciate. I think you're noticing like what it brings out in you and like how you interact with it, which I think is what I think is just what I mean, like when people are saying, oh, New York is dead, maybe it's just that they're not interested in like interacting with New York anymore. Maybe they're not in the river. Maybe they're like on the river banks watching it. Or maybe they are in the river and can't see it moving. I don't know.
They're either not interested in being in the river anymore, or they're on the riverbank and afraid of jumping back in.
Maybe
And that's fine. Either way is okay. I think it's also, I was going to just say like the climates, it's a funny comparison also, but I guess it also serves the purpose of what I'm saying is like a lake or a pond is pretty like, it's a stagnant body of water.
Yeah.
LA is almost always the same weather. New York has constantly shifting seasons.
Sure.
And those seasons inform the energy and the culture here in a really distinct way. So again, that just like comes back to this way that like they're both creative hubs, but because of the environment around them, that's part of what informs it. You know, like people will do really big things in LA because they don't have any other distractions, or because they need to force some change, some kind of shift in themselves or in the people, their audience. Whereas I think in New York, it's a lot of contextualizing what's happening in the world around us and recognizing how to mediate that for audiences. That's another way I might phrase it. But yeah, I think New York will always have some real distinct self-referential self-absorbedness, and so will LA.
Yeah.
I was going to say there was like a short essay I feel like everybody's had to read about pretension.
Okay.
That was either Ira Glass or Tony, Angels in America, Tony. Guy that wrote Angels in America. Anyway. Just about the idea, like, pretension is not a bad thing. Pretension is the great ambition to supersede yourself, you know, to pretend the world is different, pretend that life is better than it might be, to have that highfalutin, high-minded thought, and to aim for it, and by doing it, raise yourself up, which I think ties in a certain way to this kind of self-absorption or this sort of like ego mindset. I don't know. I generally try to avoid good and bad. Like, it's a hard thing not to. And I certainly feel positive and negative emotions, but I don't want to put that judgment on a place, especially.
Well, especially as a placemaker, I think you're like in a very particularly unique spot to
Right.
not be putting judgment, because you know that you have the capacity to
Yeah.
make it what you want it to be.
Yeah, and I guess just to elaborate on placemaking as a concept, anything can be made into a place, or
Yeah.
placemaking. To my mind, what I'm talking about, or what I'm thinking about when I'm placemaking, is trying to create memories and associations and relationships to places outside of simply their function. So like this place, this specific spot, I'll always know I had this moment with you guys here.
Right.
Or like I'll remember the previous fundraiser that was here that I attended.
Right.
Or any other space, people are making places or making associations with the places they're embodying and inhabiting always. I just try to make it more formalized and more of like a business than it is just an ongoing lifestyle
Right.
thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very Zen in a way, like being present too. I think especially when it's in terms of making memories and sort of like putting the layer of like this specific place versus like that specific place, and like what exactly has happened for me here.
Right.
You have to be present and aware,
Yeah.
and not just kind of like zooming through
Totally.
to actually take the time to make those memories.
Yeah. I don't know if it's something like every kid does, or if you guys did this as a kid, but like if there were certain corners or like rooms in your house that you like made a story about or had a narrative that that has nothing to do with the structure of the building, but is like you've imbued it with this sort of meaning that anyone else would not notice. I think that's like maybe where it all comes from for me.
Do you have a
Yeah.
specific example in mind while you're talking about that, or just a general?
I mean, I think I can think about like any specific part of my house. There's like the staircase up to the second floor. There was like a middle little corner where the staircase curved that like my 7-year-old bottom could fit on perfectly, and I would just kind of perch myself and feel like I was getting the full like upstairs downstairs kind of view of my house, and that was like my kind of little corner where I felt like I had moments of presence, and I would just like play with this little, I think it was a call box or like old telephone utility thing that never went away, that like I just would like like poke my finger in and like kind of like hang on and like wonder about, that like is ingrained in my mind. Or like there was like a part of the basement that was just storage for Christmas decorations and like part of the foundation, but it had like a little private word written, like it was like we put private up on it. I don't know when it happened, but to me it was like that's where there's a ghost, that's where somebody got murdered, like it's very dangerous. So like I like to, I don't know, make those things up, or I got feelings from them
Yeah.
that I just carried on and became something to me. And I just think it's a funny phenomenon that people can do that. That like I don't know if every human or every mammal does have that association, but I think as humans we have a very unique power to be like, this spot of land, this is my land, or like this place I own and like recognize has a meaning for me. And the more places you do that, the more empowered you feel.
Yeah, it's something that I think comes naturally to children more because there's so much that's uncontextualized. You're still creating so much meaning, but it is a very powerful experience and a thrilling one potentially. Also potentially a scary one, like you could be traumatically creating those spaces, but to be able to bring that concept to an adult's brain, you know, and empower them to make those spaces again, provide the tools for them to make it, is really compelling work, you know.
Yeah, I think it's fun. I think it is, again, like going back into a self-actualizing mindset of like, I've got to take ownership or make an association, find an experience here that makes it, I don't know, makes it more fulfilling.
Yeah. Well, as you've said, I feel like we've made a moment of this space, and I think that might be a good capstone for this podcast. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, this was
Thanks
a great
for having
chat.
me.
Yeah.
It was a fun time.
Yeah. And
Excited to keep walking on.
yeah, we'll just keep heading south.
Yeah.
As for everybody else on the other side of that lens, thank you for watching, listening. We do this every Tuesday so far. We haven't broken that promise yet, but please like, share, do all that stuff. Keep on this journey with us. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.